thought we'd have just an initial kōrero about, introduce what the creative arts therapies are or how people can think about them, given that it's an emerging profession in Aotearoa, so not well known necessarily. So this is just a little brief introduction before we can give you some perhaps things to try out to understand within yourself a little bit more what we're talking about.
To try and put words to this quite extraordinary thing we do. It's a combination of the psychotherapies and psychology and knowledge that has been gained over a number of years about how we work as beings, the psyche of being and the soul of being, and merging that with creative arts. So using the arts and a range of modalities of the arts. So we're talking about the arts as visual arts, as sculptural arts, dance movement, dramatic arts, creating with nature and in nature, creative writing. So a whole range of different forms of arts as a way to access and express and experiment with and play with and extend the vocabulary of the psyche, the soul, the cognition, the body. So it really is extending our capacity to not only get better at feeling our feelings, but really extend the range of those feelings. So we're not so much about feeling better, but getting better at feeling by using the merger of our imagination and our creativity with the reality of our worlding, and how those can come together and help us out of stuck places and invite us into a wider range of options for how we go about doing this thing called life and doing it in the best way we can.
I think I'll just follow on, Deborah, a little bit, because you talked about that opening up from engaging. And I think for all of us at this really difficult time that we are experiencing with the COVID and all that encompasses and all the world events that are going on, the concerns with climate change, all the things that we're holding, and then holding our own stressors that are happening in our own lives. I think this idea of giving ourselves the opportunity to be able to open up a bit, because we find and get really restricted. If we're getting into that anxiousness, if we're getting into that overwhelm, we find ourselves getting quite restricted in how we are able to view things and look at life. And I think this provides a really beautiful and natural way of sort of opening that up, relaxing down, and it does expand. Oh, take a breath. I can see things from a different viewpoint. There might be some different options, or even if there aren't, I can breathe in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, so it creates a safe environment for just experimenting with new possibilities. And particularly, like you said, when we are stressed as creatures, we tend to do what we know because it feels safer, but that can keep us stuck in some really limited places. So yeah, it's about, and it can be very serious and deep, or it can be really light and playful. It really depends on what's needed and what's called for.
Yeah, there's a term, playability, that's often used within the creative arts therapies, particularly within drama therapy, and this idea of extending our range of play. And it can refer to playfulness, but it also is a much wider metaphor that our range of play does narrow and becomes restrictive and stuck and excluding of possibilities for change when we start to feel really stressed. And creative arts therapies is really high on this idea of extending a range of play, to live into all the corners of your life, yourself, your possibilities, at a physical level, at a soul and spiritual level, at an emotional level, at a cognitive level, at a social level, at a cultural level, getting into all those corners of being a fully functioning human being.
I was just thinking how, part and parcel of tikanga Māori or te ao Māori is creativity. It's the way in which we, it's part and parcel of the acquisition of knowledge, of the maintenance, and also the dissemination of knowledge systems. And I think if it's part and parcel, then it is definitely part of the reclamation of hauora, and it's I think when I came into the program as a student, I felt like I'd met my people so much, because we spoke in a language that was full of ritual and metaphor that was, you know, and then I could really easily connect pūrākau, whakatauki, waiata, mōtiatia, whakapapa. It flowed really, really naturally. And I know, you know, my children, Māori Pākehā, and their father is Pacifica is also as well. And so tapping into the creative arts as a way of finding our inner voice. You know, I think that's another reason why I love the creative arts therapy so much too, is that yes, we have therapists that sit alongside us, but also it creates a space where we can go inward, and we can find our own inner wisdoms. We can find our own voice through the expression of toi. You know, I feel it more than I can articulate it.
That's why we use the arts, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why we use the arts, is because so much of this territory that we get into, particularly when we're in a bit of strife, is exactly that space. It's the celebratory place as well as the difficult place, where the words which live in the more cognitive parts of our brain, those words become offline. And when we know from the fMRIs that have been done into what the brain does when we're under stress, is that it tends to move away from the cerebral cortex, the prefrontal cortex, which is where Broca's center, the language center of the brain, lives. And that just sort of powers down, and we get into the limbic and the more lizardy brain parts, those parts that are more orientated towards survival. And we do pretty much the same when we're celebrating. The words go. And so then we have the arts.
For me, anyway, I always start with the body and a quietening and then awakening. And there's that time with silence, and that has materiality. You know, everything does, and it's all tangible and has a different weight and a different feeling, and how we move through, like how we move through space, time and space. And so we are material as well. So we're all matter and materials colliding and intersecting and lying gently on each other. And I think that's beautiful. And so if we see each other, to the client, the therapist, the materials, the space and everything in it, as these matter intersecting and coming in together and moving apart, we're all in relationship. And so it becomes a this, what's happening in this space. It is all, what is arriving? What are we feeling? This is what I'm getting. What are you getting? What is this material doing? You know, it's sagging. What about when it drops on the floor? So I think it's being open to everything in the space and in the time, and using it all.
Lovely. So we as material beings living in a material body, interacting with the materiality of each other, then can use the materials of the art's expression, whether it's the body moving through space, or the tangibility of clay that droops and sags, or the scratch of a pencil on the paper, or the sounding of poetic words, or the enactment of something that is dramatic and playful. We can use all those material means to express things externally, move them out of our bodies to a certain extent so that we can see them, play with them, change them, and then re-internalize them. And that is how the change process can happen within the creative arts, is we actually take these sensations that can be lodged very deep and wordlessly and untouchable inside of us, move them outside through collaborating with materials and maybe with a therapist, so that we can then play with them, shape them differently, and see how they fit when they go back inside of us.
Therapy is sometimes a loaded word, and it can really imply we need fixing up. And I just, and often in the talk therapies or counseling, it has been, you bring your problem, the therapist kind of tells you what's wrong with you, and then, then it's about kind of finding a solution to the problem. Whereas a creative arts therapist will really work quite differently to that. It's really more a companioning, so, maybe making suggestions of things to try or ways of looking at things, and just helping the person who comes along to explore things and to find new options and to make some meaning of what happens in the session. And so, I wanted to make that really clear for the people who are listening and watching, that you know, we're sort of reclaiming, if you like the word therapy, that it's therapeutic to work with the arts, and of course there's some talking involved, but that's not really where the change happens. The talking is how we make sense of what might have happened in the room or in the space, or if we're working outdoors or whatever. So you know, I think of it as a doing therapy. It's, you know, it's trying things out. It's you know, one term we use sometimes is making strange, like looking at it from a whole, you know, and not an everyday perspective, so that maybe there's a different lens that we're looking at our life and ourselves with.
The rise of neuroscience and trauma theories, and helping shift what has been otherwise quite a predominant history regarding the self, therapy, what mental health means, as being something which was quite steeped in the cognitive realm and the mental realm. And these theories helped raise the memory that these are occurring in the body, and our emotions are signs of our body speaking to us. And so I think there is starting to be more and more of that shift away from just thinking of the self as being this cognitive mind that can be somehow fixed through cognitive means, and back into the ways of knowing which are inherent to the Indigenous knowledge systems around the world, which understood the whole self. And I think creative arts therapies is one of the many different schools and practices that understand this, and taking that bottom-up approach to well-being rather than just the cognitive top-down, but we look to the body and we look to the senses and we look to the emotions as cues and meanings. And when we look to the history of the arts, particularly within Indigenous cultures, they were used so closely as forms of healing and being with experiences, being with the unknown. And a lot of, you know, what trauma theory is indicating is, you know, in one sense what occurred, but more so of what hasn't been processed in the body. And so you can see how the arts help us to be with experience.